Hello, everybody. My name is Ivan Kaisan, coming to you from Honolulu, Hawaii, where it's blue sky, 80 degrees, very boring. I'd like to welcome you to the Braver Angels Film Club if you're here for the first time, and I know a bunch of you are. Joining me today are fellow moderators Donna Murphy, Molly Zeff, and Stephanie Zamora. Stephanie, you want to talk about yourself for a bit because we'll feature you at the end about a little education piece.
Yeah, so if you were at the film club about a year ago, you might have seen my film Trustworthy, which is a film that I did about media trust and democracy, and then have spent the last year filming across the country, getting different perspectives. I've done a couple of Braver Angel Alliance locations. So I, in particular, am very, very interested in your perspectives on this. You know, where we are now post-election. We know that media and democracy are important partners. So, you know, how do we get through the next phase of this? So, and I'll be telling you a little bit, sharing a little bit more about all that when we get done.
Thank you. Very good. As everybody knows, we're talking about news media bias today, and we're talking about, in particular, three different films. The PBS NewsHour segment on how and why red and blue leaning Americans consume news differently. The second was an interview of an author who argues that journalism has changed in how it reports because it's become the exclusive profession of the educated elite. And the third is the documentary from Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is about how American news media has fed political polarization in this society. Now, for those of you who are new to this film club, uh, the way it works is that we moderators will be posing various questions to you. Um, if you'd like to speak, please raise your electronic hand at the bottom of the screen. Um, we will try to call in you in order. For now, please mute your microphone and unmute when we call on you. We'll be following the Braver Angels ground rules for discussions, which are, to summarize, we're just here to understand each other, not change your point of view or win any points. We will take turns and not interrupt others. In others, we will treat each other with respect. Now, due to time limitations, we may not get to everybody's who wants to speak. We do want to give a chance to speak to someone who hasn't spoken. We also ask you to keep your remarks brief, say under 2 minutes. And finally, because of time limitations, we may not get to everybody to speak on a question. Everybody okay with that? If so, we're going to move on to the first question, which is from Molly.
And as we often do, we're starting with the first question of just in general, what did you think of the film and what were some of your main takeaways from it? So go ahead and raise your hand with the hand raiser down below. And it's just a broad question to get people's general opinions on the films as a whole. Films or videos? Go for it, Susan, you're first.
Thanks I'll kick it off. I'm not shy.
Woo, go for it.
I thought they were all very fair. I learned some stuff I didn't know about the origins of BBC, and I really appreciated that. And that's a big news source for me, is I feel like they're pretty balanced and cover the whole world, which I want to know about. But I was really interested to hear that they came up to satisfy a need for good, clean information at that time that was sorely needed. And I feel like we need that today. Anyway, just kicking things off.
Great, thank you for doing so. Any other general thoughts on the videos or our film as a whole? Emily, take us away.
I was really glad that I watched all of these for this event, because particularly the second one, the interview piece, I probably wouldn't have watched if I had been on my own. And I'm not a big fan of hers, but I'm glad I did, because I found myself agreeing with actually most of what she had to say. Even though there were some things that turned me off, I did find myself agreeing with it, and I was really glad I did. I learned something.
Cool. We do not have more thoughts on this question. Usually this is a question with tons and tons of thoughts and answers. So I'm going to move us on to the next one. So we're going to dive into a little more meaty question. Just want to hear from people. This is going to be a summary. It can be your own opinion. It can be what you drew from the videos directly. How and why is media biased according to these 3 videos? And if you think there is news media bias, like assuming you agree with that premise, what news outlets are we talking about when we say that? Like, do you mean all news everywhere is biased? Do you think only certain viewpoints are or certain ones that represent a left or right viewpoint are biased? And also, can you share with us an example of how that's expressed? So I'm going to go ahead and start with that first one. How and why is media biased according to these 3 sources? And by the way, I should mention that these films are not like the end all be all. You might not agree with their premise, so it's totally fine if you wish to, give a different reason. Yeah, and if you did not see the films by accident, no worries. We do ask people in the Evite to take a look at films beforehand. We only have an hour and a half to discuss, so watching the film obviously would be, double or triple the time easily. But you're totally welcome to stay here. We also do record these as well. And I believe Nils, is that how you say your name, Nils?
Yeah, Niels, yeah.
Nils.
Okay, so yeah, hi, the question is media biased. And I'll say, yes, it is biased. And the way it's biased is that generally in the stories that it tells, so one example of that might be that, I made it a point, not doing it so much now, but in the mornings I would, between 10 and 11, I would flip channels between CNN, Fox, and MSNBC. And I noticed that Fox was much more likely to have stories about the border and about migrants coming across the border, and they would show, aerial views of all this mass of people at the border, and they would have a headline underneath that said Biden's border crisis. So that was a kind of bias where they're making that an important news item every single day, whereas the other stations did not emphasize that. They would have like much less coverage on the border issue. So that's, I guess, a kind of bias. And then as to why the bias exists, well, I think it was in one of those, I think it was in the first film, the CBC film, where they talked about the history of how cable stations got started and how Fox News, when they got started, Roger Ailes, I think it was, said that, no, we're not going to just have another, like a sexier presenter or something than what the other networks have. We're going to focus on conservative news that appeals to conservatives, give them the news they want. And I think that was the beginning, if maybe not earlier than that, was giving people the news they want. So people will naturally then self-select into silos of information that confirm their own biases and their own worldviews. So that's how we've gotten there. And I don't know how to get out of it unless you have, I guess it's up to each individual consumer to sample the different, media. And also I rely on, there's some outlets that rate all of the other media outlets by left, center, right, and whether they have high factuality, medium factuality. I can't remember the name of the organization that does that now, but if you can use that as to help you choose which media to follow, hopefully get a more balanced view and hopefully a more factual view.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll be discussing some of those options, and I see some of them are coming across in the chat actually for either media that covers multiple sides or tries to be centrist. Susan, then Amelia, and Kelly, you are on deck in that order.
Okay, I'll go quickly since I already spoke, but the
Sure.
fairness doctrine to me was covered quite a bit. And I think that is part of the problem here, and that was part of the Reagan sort of revolution. And I remember when that happened, it seemed to me before that everything was a little more uniform because of the fairness doctrine. And then came Rush Limbaugh. They took that down, and Rush Limbaugh kind of forged the path there and led the way for Roger Ailes and everything that came after, in my mind. But I also agree with Batya Ungar Sargon in the other video, who talked about the journalists becoming more and more of the elite and coming from the elite universities and being more and more out of touch with middle America. That's a problem too. So I see the problem from both ends, really. Yeah, I'll let somebody else talk.
Go for it, Amelia.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, from what I saw, those videos were really focused very much on television news and not so much on the print media. And I definitely think there's bias in the television news in some ways, and there certainly is in print media too, and we can talk about it, but it's a different medium. And in some ways, it's very, very difficult when you're thinking about television to extricate opinion from what's supposed to be fact-based solid news. When you had the newspaper, you had different sections of it. But with television, you don't have that same kind of partitioning. And people already mentioned the fairness doctrine. And I'll just say one thing regarding the interview with Batya Ungar Sargon. And full disclosure, I'm a local journalist. That's what I do for a living. I feel very frustrated personally with this widespread characteristic of mass media as this one big conglomerate. Because as a local journalist who is a writer who does print media, I have nothing in common with an anchor on CNN. Completely different medium, completely different issue. So that sort of idea of elites that are out of touch, the categorization is broad, I guess is what I'm saying. And there's a lot more nuance in there. So that's, yeah.
Definitely, yeah. We're going to take Kelly and then Len and then actually Atul, and then we're going to wrap this question up and move on to another question. So, oh, Kelly took herself off. So I guess Len, you're up.
Whoops.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay. So you can hear me. I just unmuted myself. That's funny. I put my hand down because I was going to speak, like in real life. So it's interesting that Amelia said that they make sort of a generalization about journalism in general, because that's the whole problem, right? Is that we generalize on both sides. We make sweeping generalizations about people and their beliefs and on either side. But from my perspective, what I notice about media, and I do mostly podcasts and radio news. I listen to a lot of NPR, but I also do go to, occasionally I go to Fox News just to see kind of what they're talking about, and also CNN and MSNBC. And from my perspective, MSNBC, CNN are extreme to the left, and Fox is extreme to the right, and NPR is more balanced, although I have noticed that in the print and NPR, sometimes it feels like clickbait. But, and again, maybe this is my own bias, but I notice a lot of inflammatory language in a lot of headlines on Fox News, especially CNN, MSNBC. Again, I probably go to Fox News more because I'm trying to look for that other perspective, but I just see a lot of inflammatory language. Like, for example, there was a link. Actually, I've been trying to talk to my dad lately. Not easy, but he sent me a link, and the headline says, Dems go on wild rant. And to me, that's inflammatory, and it already sets the stage. Certain people are going to want to read that because they're like, oh, they're already mad about whatever that issue is. And then other people are going to be turned off by it. And that's my perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And that happens, unfortunately, with almost every news source we've talked about in different discussions here, that people at some point are just turned off and tired of it. Atul, I guess actually Ken was next, but I don't see him. So Atul, pick us away for the last person on this question.
Sure. And thank you for this organization. This is very nice to talk about and get understanding from everyone. My view on this is that it's all about money, and people had biased media since the inception of the journalism. I remember I was reading some of the old books and history when US was getting independence, and there are so many different media and so much misinformation there. That's why NPR and BBC looks fair, because they don't have to cater to that many advertising dollars as compared to Fox, which caters to really one particular segment of society, or MSNBC, which caters to a totally entire segment of society, and they have to keep their audience or their consumer of the news to make money. They are in the profit business, and same thing for NYT or Washington Post or NY Post. Means we have the Sun in UK, which is tabloid, and it is like that's what people like to get their news from. In the US, I used to watch Daily Show with Jon Stewart and nightly whatever the Stephen Covey, and it was like that's what is my thing. So my understanding is that instead of blaming media, I think we need to just go to that place where we should know what is the good and what are the better, and we should, if you invest in that and buy those products and buy those things, I think it will improve. This all depends upon who is the buyer and what they are paying for. Thank you.
Yeah, we hit on a lot of the main points there, so that's great. We will touch on more answers to this question, but I want to go ahead and move on to Ivan. Take us away, Ivan.
Thanks, Molly. Actually, that's a good segue from Atul. For my question, I want to move out and look at the whole ecosystem for the news. How much responsibility should we apportion to news media organizations for the polarization compared to the various people who are the newsmakers versus the members of the news audiences, meaning us? So we have the organizations that put out the news, we have the people who make the news, and then there's us. How much is actually should we blame the news organizations for polarization when the other actors are also involved? What do you think? Susan, you want to start us off again?
I hate to keep being the one to kick it off, but everybody's shy.
No, that's good. That's good.
So I think they're giving us what we want, what makes money and what we go for. And I think part of the problem is our education system does not teach enough critical thinking skills. And that makes people more vulnerable to this kind of manipulation, which they're being manipulated for money. Quite frankly, that's what I think. And we just need more critical thinking in order to discern what is a good news source and what isn't.
All right, thanks very much. Atul, and then I'll call on Emma.
I think let's get Emma first because I already spoken. So
Oh,
if we
okay.
get time, I will speak.
Emma, would you like to start us?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I completely agree with what Susan said. Full disclosure, I'm also a journalist. So what I wanted to add to this discussion is I think that the media has a lot of blame, at their feet about polarization, but people tend to not understand how much power they have as consumers. The metrics that we have on the back end as journalists are really insane. Like we know exactly where your attention dropped off on an article, on a podcast, on a video, on TV. We know what buttons you clicked after you looked at that article. We know how much time you spent on the page. Like there's a lot of back end information here. And if people are clicking on the kinds of headlines that are like very outragey, very clickbaity, very toxic, and then spending time reading those articles, and that's the same for podcasts and TV and social media, they are just going to keep giving you what you want. So I do wish that people would exercise their judgment and their power on that front a little bit better.
Yeah, good point. Andrew. Andrea, sorry. Can you unmute? Oh,
We lost
if
Andrea.
not, I'll go. I'll go to Atul
Oh,
then.
hello. Can you hear me?
Andrea. Yes. Now we
Yeah,
can.
I'm very sorry about that. Yeah, sorry about my image. I'm actually in my car. I'm going to turn on the light for 1 second. I don't know if you can kind of see me now.
Very good. Now we can see you.
Okay. I'm not trying to be mysterious and dark. So as to your question, something came up very recently that I didn't know about. I see a big parallel between the media and the medical world, where, for example, with doctors and then the people, the clinics, the money they earn, et cetera, pharmaceuticals, doctors have the Hippocratic Oath. And I didn't know that journalists also, I guess, am I correct that there is some oath of some sort that you must be factual, et cetera? Is there some law about that? And if so, then wouldn't that be the responsibility of the producers and the journalists?
I don't know about that, but it's a good point. Atul and then Tim.
So I would just like to expand on what I was saying in the previous segment, is that definitely there are a lot of money to make. Like Rush Limbaugh had like multi-million-dollar contract, or Sean Hannity has multi-million-dollar contracts. And there are definitely other actors, the people who has money, like Koch brothers or like Jeff Bezos, or someone who is buying this media on who and they also try to create some type of narrative which they think that what is important, because again, at the end, to survive, that's why a lot of when online came, digital age came, and a lot of newspapers got bust because they could not make money and they cannot compete with. And it's all about this. Emma said that it's all about the clicks and advertising dollar, because that's what you are going for. But in some cases, definitely there are other actors who has more money or power, who definitely try to drive one type of narrative over others to create their politics or whatever view they have, or go towards one type of try to mend your thinking in certain ways. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. And Tim, you'll be the last one on this question.
Hi, thanks. I would just say, picking up on what Emma had said about, ultimately it is consumers who have the power, right? I mean, no matter whether it's media, any form of media, with the music we listen to, the movies we watch, that drives what gets created, right? But I think when it comes to news, if we don't put some sort of guardrails in place, there won't ever be a way to make sure that we have a common understanding. I think, one of the, picking up on that first question about, the three different segments, the three films we watched, there's a lack of a shared reality, right? And I mean, to a certain extent, that's always going to be the case. We don't live the same lives. But if we don't find some way to present some sort of common understanding of the basics of what is going on, then I think we're just going to keep driving into smaller and smaller segmentation, because again, like Emma said, there are so many metrics. You can cater to exactly what somebody wants to see, wants to hear, wants to read, it's absolutely insane, especially with where technology is today, that how pinpointing you can get with that. So
Right. Well, thanks for that. I just wanted to interject that I think for me, it's about whether you're looking at news to find out what is the truth, or are you just looking at news to find comfort? Can't be both.
Or to
I'm going to
get
turn
really
it over
angry.
to. Yes.
Or to get, yeah.
Or to get an
I'm going to turn
entertainment.
it. Yes, turning it over to you, Donna.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. Now we're going to take this to the very recent past. What role did news media bias play in the recent presidential election? And what role did social media bias play in the presidential election? Tim, is that, you have a hand up from before? No, okay. So taking it to the recent presidential election, what role does news and social media bias, what role did it play, if any? Okay, Stephanie, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, it's really just been the last 3 elections where social media was a factor. The 2012 election, social media was just kind of ramping up. So by 2016, 2020, 2024, social media was in full swing. So you really have to kind of, it really is a recent phenomenon, and it obviously has changed the game. So I just want to kind of throw the timeline out there.
Okay, it's very true, Stephanie. How things have changed, how quickly they've changed, right? Okay, Tim, you have something to say?
Sure. I mean, I'll go again. I think it was immense in this election cycle, especially with the advent of social media and again, how people, splintered and fractured off into their own little worlds. I personally took it upon myself to try to monitor, just from an outside perspective, try to monitor each little segment. I joined the Truth Social thing. I've stayed on Facebook. I watched the Twitter. I watched, I just sort of watched from afar and just to observe. And it was mind-boggling to me. I knew that the amount of bias was out there, but it really was stark to look at one, then the next, then the next, then the next, and see just how disparate that information was.
And I applaud you for trying to consume various sides. How many of us really do that, right? Anybody else? Andrea.
Yeah, on that note, I really think that this was, and in fact, I heard a commentator on, I believe, MSNBC say that this was probably the most badly informed electorate in recent elections because of this, because of people relying on social media or on one, very biased view. And I would go beyond saying that that they're skewed just to what people want to hear, which is very true. But I think that the greater danger is that there was a lot of wrong information, not just skewed, but the facts were not facts; they were alternative facts. So, in other words, wrong. People were getting the wrong information, things that were not even true. And that I think is probably what really dealt a big blow to what we wanted to see.
Yeah, but then it comes back to us. We've met the enemy and he is us. So if we're willing to accept what we hear on 1 or 2 particular sources and just accept that, then it comes to us that we're not more informed consumers, right? Stuff. Anybody else want to talk about this? And if not, we'll move to the next question, which is, how concerned are you about the villainization of the news media and threats to take action against news organizations or individuals? How concerned are you about the villainization of news media and threats to take action against certain organizations or individuals? Somebody's got to have an opinion on this. Tim.
I'll keep it short. I'm very concerned.
Why, Tim? Can't be that short.
Okay. I mean, because I think without, again, without reliable information, how do we form our ideas and opinions about how to move forward as as a city, as a state, as a community, as a nation? We need to have reliable information. Otherwise, I just don't think you can form in
Right,
intelligible ways to move forward.
right,
So
right.
that
But
it concerns me a lot.
right, right. But now we're asking about villainizing news sources. I mean, they say that this is the first trick in the book of authoritarianism is to go after the journalists. Um, the first thing that is
And
done, right?
and I would say criticism is fair game.
Mhm,
Villainization is not. To me,
mhm,
that's where there's a difference. So
mhm. Okay. Anybody else? How about, oh, good, Andrea? Andrea there in the dark in her car?
Yeah, yeah, I'm so sorry about this. About where I am right now. I would say it's extremely dangerous. Also, as we say, it's one step in the playbook. Of I believe we're going down that road to where journalists are going to be hesitant to really say what they believe, what they've discovered. Well, not believe, but to tell us what they've actually found. If it goes against, wow, I guess I'm not very good with wording wording my opinion. But yeah, I'm very worried for journalists, and I'm very worried for our exposure to the news, to what's going on. Already, I think there was some threats about taking down a news channel, a news program, things like that. And that to me is horrible. You have to be able to see both sides of a story, regardless of whether it's pro or anti, whatever it is that you believe. You need to have a good, fair view of both sides, or many sides.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Oh, now we have a lot more hands raised. Okay, Emma, how about you?
Sure, I'll be the contrarian in the room, I suppose. I am actually not super concerned. I don't think that the rhetoric that in particular Trump uses about the media is great, and obviously we've seen at times where that has led. But the landscape in the US as far as media is so diffuse and so unregulated from like a federal perspective that it's very, very hard to shut down the US media landscape as a whole. There's a lot of drawbacks to it being diffuse and unregulated that we've already discussed, but that is like one very big positive, that it's so fractious that like really coming down hard on the media's ability to do their job in the US, if that's a threat coming from the government, I think is actually quite difficult to make a reality.
Okay, thank you for your contrarian opinion. And Eric, how about you?
Yes, thank you. I just said quickly, I sounded mostly like the villainization was coming from one side and one guy mainly, but the obvious one, but I mean, he villainizes a lot of people, and that's kind of his whole shtick. Um, and not there isn't necessarily a lot that comes of it. It's in the last term. It's awful to villainize the media, but I'm not especially concerned about it, I suppose.
Okay, okay, thank you. We've got two more folks, Judy and then Amelia. Judy?
Yes, my comment is similar to some that other people have made. I think people hearing the refrain a lot. Fake news helped them to distrust what they were hearing in the news. I know the Canadian Broadcasting film kind of made that connection of people hearing, you know, that people it did contribute to people distrusting the news. It was at least their conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Judy. And then last but not least, Amelia.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. The first thing is that if you have one side that is having more of that villainization rhetoric, it creates a feedback loop with the polarization. Because the more that one side hears about the media is untrustworthy, the less likely they are to talk to the media. And then you hear more, oh, the media is not showing their side, but the media they're not talking to the media, so they can't get their side. And so you have this feedback loop that exists over and over. And now this group of people will only talk to this media, and this group of people will only talk to this media. And so it feeds the polarization. And the other thing is, again, it messes with funding. If you don't trust the news, you don't want to pay for it, obviously, for good reason. But politics is only one facet of what the news media does. And so when you're not funding the media, you're also not funding things like investigations into psychiatric facilities where there's real harms going on, or those really in-depth projects where they're finding things that are happening in the judicial system or in the courts or with, I don't know, the foster care system, those kinds of really in-depth things. So politics is just one piece of that. And it's just really unfortunate that people hear that and that it all kind of falls under that big conglomerate. So yeah.
Yeah, and with our loss in local news sources, all the investigative reporting at the local level that's not going on right now. It's kind of sad. Okay, and with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Stephanie.
Okay, so I know a lot of people have already alluded that this is all about money, et cetera, but you know, to what end are we being polarized? You know, money, power, attention. I mean, there's some people out there that just do it for attention. And then, you know, kind of, is it okay to put capital gain over our welfare? And then how can we motivate media to overcome the drive towards bias? So Deborah, I looks like you had your hand up. Do you still want to try to answer that? Go ahead. Oh, you had to unmute? You're still, are you still wanting to answer, Deborah?
Oh, no, I just wanted to ask a question, because maybe I'm remembering incorrectly, but I'm pretty sure that Project 2025 lays out some kind of plan for getting rid of NPR and also Pacifica Radio and replacing their programming with religious programs. Has anybody heard that, or does that sound familiar to anyone?
Yeah, I think I saw something just today that NPR could certainly be a target of cost-cutting measures.
Yeah, Atul, what do you want to say about this?
Yeah, and I think that's what the segment I was going, that definitely there is a target for more balanced news organization like NPR, which is run with the public, some of the federal funding and our own donation. And that kind of organizations may be they're getting less and less, and definitely it will be, they are target which can be eliminated. So what we can do is that we need to make sure that we tell our congressmen and our public officials that this is a institute which we want to fund from the public side to to make sure that we have that kind of non-biased reporting and more to the center reporting, and that will help. If we don't do that, what will happen is that echo chambers getting created, and that is the biggest problem with the segmentation. And like everyone from the like Tucker Carlson, he created his own following, and which every day these person has to come up with some new, more like radical ideas to get that his follower to get engaged with them. And it is like influencers, which every day they have to create something more ridiculous or more extreme to get people engaged. And that is the problem if we don't have that media where only getting money is not the thing, and where we have to make sure that we donate to those type of organizations like ProRepublica or the UK paper, I'm forgetting the name.
BBC.
Not the BBC. BBC is state funded. The other news organization, the someone, and NPR. Please donate and make sure that you talk to your representative to make sure that their funding is balanced, or at least it's met.
Eric, what would you like to say on that? Thanks, Atul.
Yes, thank you. Briefly, on NPR, I know most of their funding, most of their operating fundings does not come from the federal government anymore. It comes from donations and foundations. There was a switch some time ago, and as federal funding has dried up, their other sources have stepped up, and but yeah, to the direct question, to what end is polarization? To some of the for some of the outlets, the TV shows and things, I think that they exist because they want they have an audience, and they're to some extent they're captured by their audience. Sometimes, some extent, they have a message, but it's all about making payroll, and it's about money. I think it was covered in one of the films. It's a lot about dollars, the bottom line for different organizations. But one really polarizing, very deliberately polarizing entity that I know is like emails, which is I'm kind of older, and I is probably social media now, but I mean, back in the Bush administrations, there were organizations, Move On and these things, and they were polarizing. They deliberately made told you things that would get you angry, and got me very angry, got me very activated. Maybe I think I still feel like maybe it was a good thing that I was doing, but I gave money because they asked for money, and they said money is how we make a difference in this, and I think I helped to create a monster. I think that some of these entities, I'm not sure about ones on the right, but there's I know the funding that these groups on the left, they scare you, they make you angry, and then they tell you, we need your money to stop these threats, and we're going to lose everything. We're going to lose all these things, including democracy, if you don't give us money now. And I think some of their motivation a lot of their motivation is is money. It sure looks that way to me. Yeah, so yeah, I talked enough, I think. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the next question, or yeah. So that's Ivan.
All right, thanks, Stephanie. Next couple questions are for those of you who do think that the news media is biased. The first part of that question is, if you think the media is biased, what should the media do about it? What should they do different going forward? And the flip side of that, maybe do you even care? Because the trend is to move away from those media organizations anyway. Should you care? Len.
Well, thing I found very interesting that Batya was talking about was how the journalists used to be working class and how the goal of people like Pulitzer was to make journalism accessible to the working class. So certainly that would be one thing, to be addressing the needs of the working class, who are the majority of the country.
All right, that's a good point. Anybody else want to talk? Molly?
Sure. I think that there's I feel a little bit unusually skeptical and pessimistic about this. I think there's very little we can do unless there's a massive citizen movement to change news. I think that writing into organizations when you find something false or overplayed is important, but I don't think that works on an individual level. I think it works at scale because a lot of citizens do it together. So when you say what should news media organizations do differently, in a way, I almost don't think I'm someone who leans towards this is the consumer's fault. That we like things flashy. I mean, like I think the sort of very visual equivalent of this is telling millions of people to stop looking at an accident when you drive by it. The news media is made to be the flashy, written version of, or maybe video version of that, right? And so I think you can't change a population in mass overnight, or even maybe in a few months, to not view media as entertainment. So I think I think I almost want to challenge the question, even though I appreciate having it and approved it. I think we should definitely care, but I think there's almost nothing that news will do differently unless they're pressured. I do think one idea I had as we had been talking together tonight is that it would be awesome if news organizations that are known for being biased, I'm going to rattle off, everything from, the ones I hear the most often slammed are like CNN, Fox, One America, MSNBC. Note that I mixed in right, left there intentionally. I think that if they were to have to fact check each other, if they were paired to fact check each other and they knew they were going to get called on it, and they publicly broadcast their fact checking as part of their segment, that would put them in line. Imagine when you get shamed by when you're a kid and you get shamed by a teacher, you shut up quickly, right? So I think if they were getting publicly shamed by each other, that would be helpful. I don't know if they would agree to this. But I want to mention two examples, I think, from the right and the left. I think and I'm on the left, but I recognize this is a huge problem across the board. I think that Project 2025 was in some ways way overplayed by the left wing. And the reason I say that is because when I read a piece in The Guardian, which is also left wing, The Guardian being British, it pointed out that these policy proposals are put out every 4 years since Reagan by Heritage Foundation. This is not new. And by the way, Brookings, like various, what are they called? Think tanks on the right and left put these out all the time, like policy proposals. There's nothing new. And that people freaked out over Project 2025. Trump himself called Project 2025 ridiculous. Now, we don't always want to take politicians at their word, but the fact of the matter is it was not coming from politicians. It was coming from an institution that is a kind of institution that no matter what their policy bent, have been doing this for literally over 40 years, guys, over 40 years. On the right, I saw that Kamala Harris's take on trans people's rights was way overplayed. She talked about it a lot, about trans issues, a lot less than the right-wing media played up the issue of her being pro-trans people's rights. So like we can see this across the board. And I think if they cared enough to that's just my proposal. Sorry, if they fact check each other, it would be an ideal solution or one solution. So.
All right. I didn't know about the 40-year history of that. I should say at this point that at the beginning, I said this was a two-part question. First part was what should the news media organizations do? Second part is what should we do? So I just want to forewarn everybody that part two is coming up. And right now, we're just talking about what should the news media do. For now, let's go to Atul and then Andrea and then Don. Atul.
Sorry, I can. My thinking is that I think your part two was first is that should we care, and I think we should definitely care because especially the larger organization which used to fund actual investigative journalism and finding out corruptions, which are not very good profit making, but they cross subsidize it, correct? So if the traditional media is in decline, especially like New York Times, I get so many things other than news from New York Times, from recipe to how to dress or film, uh, books. And that's what my worry is, that it's just if those kind of traditional media declines and we get segmented, or just everyone's getting news from social media in 140 characters, then those type of investigation journalism, which is very important for the society, will be um, not there for us. And we have seen that in the uh, local corruption space or local news space where it is totally decimated. There used to be local
Okay,
newspapers.
so you care, but what you have any suggestions what they should do?
Means what, again, it's they have to get money, because if it's like from Chicago Tribune to LA Times to New York Times or to the WAPO, it's they have to be rescued because they were just like sinking, and until they find a way uh, to make sure that their bottom line is there, or some way where we can support it, it will be difficult to like really support that. And that's what it used to be, like everyone has to get New York Times in New York City. Now no one get a newspaper, and no one wants to pay for subscription. So
Yeah.
is there an
All right. All right. Thank you. Andrea and then Donna.
Quick comment about the New York Times. I was just visiting my mom in Indiana, in a college town, a university town, where the New York Times is no longer delivered, which was just very frustrating. That it all of a sudden became not available for the people who did want to receive it, and that's really a problem. And anyway, that was just a note. I believe what we should do is go to the places where we find where education and people are together. In other words, the schools. This is where kids are learning what's important, how to socialize, how to see, how to think critically. In school, I believe, where you need to start and get people interested again in not just in the drama, but in the news itself, which may not be as theatrical. And then also to many other places where people meet. For example, religious. I was in the Midwest. I'm driving through Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Jersey, and there's a lot of radio stations, a lot of channels that discuss the news. Sorry, not the news, church, that discuss religion. So I think, you know, I don't know how or what, but I think those are the places that we could address this lack of interest, shall we say, in the
Right.
news for, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Donna, and then John, and then Deborah.
So I'm really concerned about the truth and what is reported in these various news sources. One thing we could do, so someone mentioned already that there you can go and see in one location whether a news source is to far left, far right, or in the center. And we probably all pretty much heard about that. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to go to a location that talks about whether a news source is whether there are editors that look for facts, they fact check, they make sure that the reporters are doing their job consistently. And we could go to that one location and see how the news source that we like to listen to stacks up. And, you know, and maybe make us think a few times. And this is going to have to include probably blogs and podcasts, in addition to the legacy news sources.
Okay, thanks, Donna. John, then Deborah, then Molly. I think Molly will be the closer.
So first of all, I wanted to answer Donna's comment about wouldn't it be nice if there was a place to do that. Ground.news actually does that for major news media. If you go to the Ground.news page for a particular media source, it will provide you information about the factuality based on 3 independent sources. They're not the ones who source the information. They find it from 3 independent sources as to the level of factuality in general of that particular source. But what I wanted to add to the discussion as far as what news media ought to do is I think the problem is incentives as the films that we watched talked about and also the discussion identified. And in order to change the incentives, it's going to require changing the business models. So I think what has to happen is that news media needs to start exploring creative and alternative business models and find out if there are any business models that do better at providing higher factuality, less biased news than what we're getting today. Because we see, you know, we've seen in the films and the discussion why the current business models are causing the problems that they are. And I'm somewhat skeptical of public funding being the solution to that, because I think that's going to create its own set of biases. And there's actually some evidence of that already with public funding. But that is an alternate business model, and as pointed out earlier in the discussion, that does create a different set of incentives. And so I think the key is probably alternate business models for the news.
Very good. Deborah.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I think there has to be some kind of a mass movement, and hoping that there are people that will come together to you know, make some decisions and be really clear about what we're looking for, less bias, maybe more civic conversations on these mass media like CNN or MSNBC. You know, I mean, we can boycott these shows and they'll be hurting, and you know, it's all about profits, right? So I think that they would be more inclined to listen if we could all get together in an organized way and make some demands.
Okay. Molly, were you wanting to speak or no longer? If not, you know, I think we covered quite a bit of possible reactions or responses to the bias. I think I'd like to move on to Stephanie for the next question.
Okay, so what is your personal way of combating the problems highlighted in news bias, and even combating your own confirmation bias? You know, do you consume opposing viewpoints, or do you simply kind of just throw in the towel and watch what you feel like watching? So really just want to see who kind of challenges their own media bias. And even though it is a little bit uncomfortable sometimes to watch opposing views, I'd love to hear your experience about that. So we'll start with Len.
Oh, what I do is I don't watch any television news or news commentary, and I read journals or newspapers on the left and the right. I, New York Times, Washington Post on the left, Wall Street Journal and National Review on the right. Also, The Economist, Foreign Affairs, and The Atlantic magazines. And I find that, yeah, they're certainly biased, but one of the main differences is the facts that they cover. There are facts you'll learn from one side and not from the other, including with the columnists, not just the news. And so I find I get a better picture, and maybe from that and reading scholarly books and participating in Graver Angels, I feel, well, this is me personally, I feel pretty detached from the left-right controversy at this point. It has a big effect. It's had a big effect on my viewpoint.
Okay, Susan.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what Len said. I consume news media. I go a little further. I go way to the far left and way to the far right and everything in between to try to just consume as much as I can across the spectrum. And occasionally there's a lot of weird stuff on the fringes, but occasionally I get a gem that's like, wow, I didn't know that. And it turns out it was true. I don't necessarily like that they get my money of my clicks. But anyway, I do it through this app I have called Smart News, where they have all kinds of right and left media in their feed. It's like a news aggregator feed. And so I can jump from the far left to the far right to see how differently the headlines are completely different. The stories are emphasizing completely different things. I just find it fascinating, actually. And I also, like people are saying in the chat, I cross-check the news sources with where they fall on the media bias charts, just to make sure I know who I'm reading and where they are on the chart. And like, okay, I take that into account. Yeah, so that's how I do it. It's time consuming and probably makes me more freaked out about things, but that's what I do.
Thanks for sharing. Atul.
So as like if anyone has that kind of thing, like if you really want to understand the news, you need to definitely go to various venues. The good thing about going to various venues is that sometimes the entire segment of news is missing from the other side, like things which I can find on Fox, and which is also news, and it is not that, but it will never be covered by New York Times, or some things you can find on some of the things. So it's good to have, but again, it's very time consuming. So what I do mostly is that I stick to my Apple News, and if something is interesting, is I have definitely WSJ and NYT and a couple of more app, and definitely go there. But it's like just read the news, you will know that where they are biased and what is the headline. Because in previous also, there will be like a big headline for the same news. Different newspaper will have different headline based on what they think is important and what will catch the eye. And so you need to make sure that you are not going beyond headline. Mostly if you start reading it after the first paragraph, then you will come to know that exactly what happened. Before that, it's all fluff, and that is for just like if you are very hurry and you will not get the entire thing, and unless you read the detail, you will know what they are trying to say and where they are making the fluff and where they are leaning. So I feel that it's a very good game, and that's what, as Susan said, that makes me sometimes laugh, angry, and all type of emotions. But it's important to understand that everyone is biased. Don't trust anyone, and like trust with the some some salt, like some a bit of salt of that, and always make sure that you try to understand that what they're trying to say, and see what is actually happening. Because if you see that how Israel-Palestine war is covered in various news media, and that's like totally two extreme views of things, which both are not true. So you need to make sure that you get that thing in perspective, that what you are reading or what someone is reporting.
Thanks, Atul. Nicole.
Thank you. I have tried to shift the way I am consuming news here in the last month or so, with conversations with some of my family members who have very different opinions on things. It became very apparent to me that I was completely missing the other side of things. And so my brother recommended Ground News, and so I've started using that as my primary news source. And prior to that, I primarily used Apple News for news that I was reading, but it dawned on me, I'm fairly certain, and I would love it if somebody would correct me if this isn't the case, but I'm fairly certain that they use algorithms to populate what news pops up. And so I think that certainly was playing into why I wasn't getting a full picture of things. So I have stopped using Apple News and am relying primarily on Ground News. And I guess my favorite feature of the Ground News is the blind spot function that they have. And so I make it a point every day to try and utilize that feature and look for things that I maybe wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Great. Okay. Let's see. So, we've been kind of talking about this. Oh, Andrea, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see your picture there. Go ahead and answer.
Oh. Yeah, I have Google Home, it kind of is like a Alexa, and what I do every morning is I get the little blurb from multiple news sources, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, BBC, PBS, you name it, and they're blurbs. It's not in depth, but what they put out are, I guess, what they consider to be the top news item of the moment. So that's kind of interesting to compare, and then from there, I can always go and read a little bit further about it. But I was gonna say I can't write since I'm driving, but there's a website that I was recently made aware of. It's called Tangle, as in like your shoelaces are tangled, and it's unbiased. They bring together news sources from the left, the right, and it's I find very unbiased, very good seeing what's in the news and how it's being reported.
Yeah, great. Now, Isaac, he's been a force, Isaac Saul from Tangle, and he cranks out a lot of content every day. And I wouldn't say it's unbiased. I would say it's bipartisan, because he does weigh in on what the right is saying, what the left is saying. He'll say, he'll have a section where it says, well, this is my opinion. I am entitled to my opinion. But yeah, he has a really nice newsletter. Yeah, Molly.
Yeah, 2 notes. I just want to say that I let me know if I miss anything, but I tried to grab 6 sources from the chat that people have written or said to put in one spot. If you don't know how to save the chat, it's just the 3 dots there, or you can copy paste that one. Chime in and let me know. Oh yeah, the week is another good one. That's one thing I just want to mention, that I've been trying to compile all these suggestions from different people as we go. And another thing I was going to mention is I would say I mostly get WBUR, which is to say BBC, and do throw in the towel on trying to get lots of sides, only because it's kind of overwhelming for me personally to try to see all different viewpoints on top of everything else, going on. But I would say that what I do in my own life is I joined Braver Angels which was not meant to be a pitch at all. I didn't realize it came across that way, but literally I realized 4.5 years ago that I could like count on one hand the number of Republicans in my life, and it was like, I need to solve that. So I actually looked up different organizations doing this kind of work and joined Braver Angels because of the fact that I knew my life was biased. Along, news sources just being one example. So I would say, like in Boston, you have to work hard in Cambridge, Massachusetts to find Republicans. And two of my close friends here, we love getting together and debating stuff, and we share each other's, we share our viewpoints from the news or the books we read, which are in some ways pretty different. And so I'd say that's like another way to think of it is like just diversifying our friend circles, which like clearly we're all here, we're doing that well. And I know at the Braver Angels convention, I've hardly felt happier than being around so many people of diverse perspectives than at the convention this summer. And part of it was like everyone was like, let's dive in respectfully, let's dive in with a lot of like warmth and tact. And I think one of the reasons people outside of this large but still very small segment of our group, I mean there are 200 groups, at least a few hundred like us, but it's that outside of the group people often come in saying, I already know I'm right and I already know you're wrong. And I find that to be less true in a circle like this. So that also helps is just my own personal life, making sure I'm getting people who have different perspectives.
All right, Atul, we'll finish up with you, and then Molly will go back to you to do your
Sorry,
question.
I already spoke. I just wanted to
Oh, okay.
clarify one thing is that this, like a lot of people go to different aggregators, and that normally works like Tangle. I don't know whether Tangle is the aggregator or not, or some of the aggregators, which does not really produce news. And if we are trying to start consuming that, so actual news producer does not get that kind of money, and that creates another problem. So just wanted to say that.
Thanks. Go ahead, Molly. Let's go to your question.
Great. Okay, so we're gonna switch gears a little here. I'm gonna drop this in the chat. In one of the videos that was short, I think it was like 11 minutes, Batya, by the way, she spoke at our convention for those of you who didn't get to go, and I think we did record it, and she's awesome. She is someone who traveled America interviewing people from the working class, and her one of her statements is, or her beliefs that she tries to promote is, there's actually really not a partisan divide among many working class people. It's really more of people see a class divide. And then the partisan divide, she says, is sort of like, the luxury of an elite group in the country, which is to say like upper middle or middle class, or the meritocracy, whatever, the meritocratic class, whatever you want to call that group. So that's just a little bit background on her. And I'm going to put out there, she says in her 11-minute interview that in Bad News, she's saying basically elitist coming from a top segment of these, highly ranked colleges are covering topics important to, surprise, liberal elitist. And so I wanted to put out there this question of what topics do you feel like are missing that they should be covering in a variety of liberal and conservative news sources that she's saying are largely catering to upper middle class interest. What are we not seeing? I know that might be hard. If you're in the working class, if you come from the working class, if you spend time with in your perhaps religious community with people in the working class, maybe you have a sense of what's not there. I know it's hard to imagine what's not there, but what issues would we see more of if the liberal and conservative mainstream media weren't focused on, quote, like, issues important to elitists, as Batya is claiming? Yeah, go for it, Lynn. For some reason, I can't hear. Oh, because you're muted. Yeah. Let's get you unmuted, Lynn.
Yeah, like, I've been involved Braver Angels in rural urban affairs, and there's, you get it sometimes in the conservative media, like Wall Street Journal, but you don't get enough even there about how like regulations hurt people who don't make a lot of money. So you on the left you'll just get the view that regulations are hurting rich people, and so I don't care about that. They're probably bad anyway. Being rich, but you'll get much more from talking to people and meeting people, how it's hurting. Regulations can badly hurt, communities, and devastate industries that working class communities and rural communities depend on.
Thank you for that. Everything from coal regulations to tariffs to other energy things, these all definitely affect working class. Yeah, go for it, Andrea.
Did you say Andrea? Oh,
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, go.
Oh, okay. I couldn't hear too clearly, so I hopefully I'm not repeating what somebody just said. But as a member of the working class, really struggling, I'm an Uber driver now, and it's really, well, not paycheck to paycheck, but it's Uber check to Uber check. And what I would love to hear more about is why are prices so high? Why am I finding it so difficult to keep up with with living, with the rent and the price of the food and everything else? Because a lot of people are feeling the same, and I find that a lot of people want to find someone to blame. So, it's easy. Okay, it's the president or it's whatever. But I don't think so. I think there's more to it. And I'd like to know, why are these prices high and what can we do about it, if anything?
That is fabulous. Yeah. By the way, Massachusetts just voted for Uber and Lyft drivers to be able to unionize, speaking of how legislation affects, working class. Yeah, Eric, and then Atul, you're on deck.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I'm sure that there's plenty of right-wing among the working class. I'm sure they have some concerns that aren't being addressed. I can't really articulate what those might be. But I remember kind of a left versus left thing. There was after the financial collapse in 2008, there was real buzz including elite, educated circles about capitalism has a problem, or capitalism as we're doing it right now is a problem. And we were doing, it was this thing with it's not serving people well, and the recession wasn't too bad, but the jobless recovery from that collapse really was a disastrous one and went for a long time. There were movies. There was the whole Hunger Games thing. There was and there was I saw a wonderful movie with Will Ferrell, the other guys, and there was other movies, and there was the Don't See Me Now, and there was a whole theme, and there was this thing where there was the whole thing about the 1%. Like the 1% is a problem. We are the 99%, and we can do something about this. And all of that went away. It's not entirely, but it was definitely drowned out by around 2014 by all these other concerns on the left about gay rights, the trans rights, the environment too, but all these issues the racial issues, there was the whole the woke thing about the systemic racism versus systematic racism and structural racism. These things that nobody knew about, nobody talked about except in like academic circles. and now it was all coming to, and kind of dividing the left versus the left. I know he died a couple of years ago, but I know an actual communist who was being called a right winger
I'm gonna ask you to wrap up
by
as
his
we.
left wing friends.
Yeah.
And because he wasn't on board with he wanted to talk about class issues, and he was, but the new lefty friends, the new lefty people controlling different organizations, they wanted to talk about, and he's a black man, and he was with the Black Panthers. He was a member, but he didn't want to talk about structural racism and systematic. He wanted to talk about, and so I think that's to wrap up.
Yeah.
That's I think right there is a big one that's a blind spot and might have cost the Democrats one of the things that cost the Democrats the election recently.
Yeah, I hear that. And Ivan, you want to wrap up this question?
Sure. Just a quick one. I had a trip to the Midwest, some major cities in the Midwest, and I did it all without a car. And I found out how terrible it is to go city to city by bus. For one thing, you can have a bus station that has supposedly the bus routes and the buses that are leaving for different cities. My city, for some reason, was not listed. And so I had to check in with the bus ticket lady to find out where exactly I had to pick up, which bay my bus was. In one case, you had a nice brand new bus stop, bus terminal, and the bus picked people up from the parking lot, not the terminal. And then when I went to Chicago, I went on the Blue Line, the main line connecting downtown with the airport. I found out once I got on the line, a third of the stops were not ADA compatible, meaning if you were in a wheelchair, too bad you can't get off or on the subway on those stations. One third of them. That shocked me. So, I think just attention to how life is so difficult for people who cannot afford a car, that was eye opening. That's all.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think as someone who travels frequently around different cities by bus and between cities, I've definitely seen some huge issues with public transit too. Atul, go for it.
I'll just say that the question was that what news should cover, and my understanding that they should just cover news and not opinion, and just on the basic whatever the news is news. It just does not have any other flavor of it, like someone got robbed or someone got elected or someone, whatever. It's a news. Elon Musk, like it was SpaceX, went to the space. It's a news. Please don't put any spin on it and just stay away from opinion. As long as they stay and keep their editorial. Editorial is fine, but news should be news. And if they treat it like a news, I think it will cover vast majority of things which we all concerned about.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to actually mention that much like politicians, news will be, what's the word, responsive to viewers en masse. So if you find something super biased or that just drives you nuts because of how they covered it, get 10 of your friends to write the same piece to the news source and have them speak to that. I think we actually
difficult because what happens is that if I like New York Times, and one article if I don't like, and they have done a lot of things like which I don't like or they were totally wrong or totally biased, but I love other articles, so I cannot just stop it.
Okay, thank you, Atul. I think now we'd like to ask Stephanie, on the basis of wisdom that she has obtained through being involved in the movie Trustworthy, to give us some pointers and some words of wisdom about media bias.
Yeah, I'll make it quick because we're getting towards the end, but I am glad to see how much the conversation, because when I started these conversations a couple of years ago, everybody was kind of wringing their hands. What do we do? What do we do? This is too big, too overwhelming. And definitely the conversation is starting to realize like we are the consumers. We have an enormous amount of power. And, information is kind of a diet of the mind. And so it really is incumbent upon us to have a good diet. And even if it's for a specified amount of time per day or week or whatever, really there is quality news out there. I think most of the people that are on these kinds of calls know that. And it's not journalism, even journalism at its suboptimal isn't really the problem. It's been other social media influences. So how do we just kind of encourage those around us to keep following journalism? Sensationalism, fear, all that. If you want some fear, go watch a horror movie. But otherwise, how do we get good? How do you consume good information? It is out there, and kind of just make your diet that. And the other thing is that, we've had a lot of discussions about the First Amendment, and nowhere in the First Amendment does it say you can say whatever you want. What it says is that Congress shall make no laws. So that just means it's really upon us as a civilization, as a society, to, govern ourselves on this so that we have that freedom. But it just, some people think, it's, you can't, there is a responsibility that comes with free speech. And so to any extent, any of us in our circle can be mindful of what we put on social media. That's going to help, the greater good. So, and just as a side note, actually, I met the CEO of Ground News back in January of 2021, literally 2 days after a couple of days after January 6th. That was the inspiration for Trustworthy, because when you look at Ground News and you just spending, what they're able to do is they can get some of the metadata about the article. So there's usually like a paragraph or two about the article. There's all the headlines, but even just seeing who's not covering something, who is covering something a lot, the factuality, the ownership, even just spending time skimming through Ground News, you're just like, oh, wow, that's how, all of this diversity happens. And you can get that level of subscription for free. Usually once you start to dig into the articles more in depth, you have to get to the paywall, but that's like the fastest track to media literacy is a Ground News subscription, honestly, or something, one of the other all sides. So, I'm very hopeful that people are understanding. Social media kind of crept up on us. It really is only a decade or less dynamic. But we, as a civilization and society, we respond pretty quickly. And I see more and more people saying, no, we don't want this anymore. And capitalism will never produce something that we won't pay for. So all we have to do is en masse, move towards the information that we want. And, we think that the newspapers are struggling because the advertising industry has dried up for them. But really, advertising as an industry has not dried up. Because if you go and look at Facebook's Metaverse's financial statements, last quarter of 2023, they made $29 billion. That was their net. They did 138 billion with a B in advertising revenue for one quarter. So we got to just get some of those advertising dollars back to journalism, and then it'll be more of a surviving business. So there's my quick spiel. Sorry, taking it over.
Thank you, Stephanie, very much. And please do watch her film, Trustworthy. I'd like to quickly introduce our next film for December. It is called A Case for Love, and is just right for the holiday season. This recent documentary seeks to change the national narrative of division by highlighting stories where people's lives have been uplifted because they cared for others or others cared for them. Examples include how a woman who became a drug addict and prostitute after having grown up in a dysfunctional family in West Virginia found support to turn her life around from Thistle Farms in Nashville, Tennessee. And how a couple fostered a family of 3 children and then decided to adopt them despite the difficulties. So please join us in December. We don't have a date yet, but we'll let you know. Lastly, please join Braver Angels if you're not a member already. Join for just $12 a year. You see the types of wonderful things we do. Molly put in a really good plug for us. She was looking for somewhere where she could could get to know people who were very different from her. And that's what we do. We bring different types of people together so we can get to know each other. Again, we are not trying to change people's minds about the issue. We try to change people's minds about each other. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. And ta-ta.